Right. So the reality is 97% of press releases that go over the wire, and some of them pay that $1,700 plus, 97% of them do not generate earned media. And that's what we call it when a journalist writes about you. And that's the goal of it. When a press release goes out, it gets syndicated, it appears on certain websites, the press release, but is not the article. We're looking for someone to transform that press release into an article. And the fact is, most press releases don't. And what I found is that if you look at the 3% of press releases that do get picked up, there are a lot of themes and a lot of types of releases that you can do yourself and you can replicate.
All right. Welcome back to the Winner Circle. Today is a great day. We have a fantastic guest on the show today. I'm honored to have Nikki Kennedy with us. He's the founder and the president of eReleases, a leading service in provide affordable press releases distribution. Mickey has built eReleases with the mission of making publicity accessible to all businesses, regardless of their size or budget. It started in 1998, right? I'm right, eh?
That is correct. Yes.
And for the fact that you recognize that small business often struggle to get the same level of PR attention as larger companies, you've helped over 10,000 clients make their mark in the media. And today, we are diving into a topic critical for any business looking to elevate their brand. And the topic for today is going to be how to get real media coverage, not just vanity PR. So Mickey is going to lead us through this path and explain to us how best we can actually make that approach. So I'm going to officially welcome you to the Winner Circle podcast, and it's a pleasure to have you here, Mickey.
Thank you for having me.
All right, you're welcome. And so today, let's start with your journey, Mickey. What inspired you to create eReleases, and how did you identify, the gap in the PR market for small businesses?
That's right. So I guess around closer to 30 years ago, I was working for a telecom research startup as employee number 3, and we were sending out press releases. And they weren't doing much, and I was faxing. So it took a day and a half to send, I think was around 150 faxes. The fax machine was a state-of-the-art $5,000 fax machine that held like 100 numbers. So I would program 100 numbers, hit send. It would take all day, and it would spit out 2 or 3 errors along the way that they weren't able to get through. And then I'd have to delete those numbers and put 50 more in. And it really was a waste of time, and nothing was happening. And the owner's like, yeah, I've always done releases. They've never done much. I was just like, why are we doing it? And I just felt like, the owner's like, it works for people. People say it works. And so I was like, well, let's figure out what we're doing wrong. And I noticed that we were sending out a lot of data, which, they say data is good for PR, but we weren't putting it in context. And we had just published Caribbean country traffic, inbound and outbound traffic to the United States, these Caribbean countries. And we had sent a press release with those data tables, and nothing happened. And I was looking over the data, and I noticed like one country stood out. I can't even recall what it was, but it's not like a country you would probably recognize. And it had like more inbound and outbound traffic than like all the others combined. And I didn't know why. So I asked around and found out that at the time, it was the call center for 1-900 numbers. Those were popular at the time. I guess this was like the this is probably the early 90s. And 1-900 numbers, for those who probably don't know, and there's probably a lot of people, you could call a 1-900 number and maybe get a pre-recorded horoscope that changes every day, and you hit a number for your your sign. If you're a Cancer, press 7, and it would be like a certain price, 75 cents a minute. You could also talk and speak to a live psychic, or you could speak to an expert with pets. You're having problems with your, pets, potty training. You could speak to an expert for like $3 a minute. So they were very popular at the time, and they were billed to your landline. And no cell phones at the time, or maybe there were a few bag phones, but mostly doctors and the ultra wealthy had those. But so I made it my mission to learn from what I was seeing, looking at articles, and I realized that journalists like a story arc. And when you just publish a data table, there's not a lot of story there. And so I talked about the traffic that we had just got. The traffic to this one country stands out as an outlier, and why is it? And it, talking about the 1-900 phone industry, and then sent out that fax. And all of a sudden, we got picked up in The Economist, Financial Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Red Herring, several telecom trade publications. And I was just like, wow, that worked. And I continued to do more story based, where I would include our data, but I would put, the elements of a story in there. And it allowed a journalist to tell, an interesting story that their audience doesn't know. And, before we were requiring the journalist to figure out what the story was behind the data. And, we found they weren't willing to be investigative reporters when we're supposed to be issuing the news. And that was a big transformation. And as I continued to send out releases through fax, two things happened. We were continuing to get pickup, which was new. And then secondly, we were getting calls, and journalists were saying, hey, in the future, instead of faxing us, could you email it? And I was like, yes, email's so much easier. You could literally email 150 people in, a minute, as opposed to a day and a half faxing. And so that was sort of a light bulb moment where I was just like envisioning a Rolodex of emails and emailing press releases to journalists. And so I spent about a year, getting journalist email addresses. Mostly I was networking with them in bulletin boards online, and they were very willing to share their email addresses. And so that's how I launched eReleases in 1998. And
Wow.
I was just a matchmaker sending press releases on behalf of small businesses to journalists, and we had really good success. Over the years, PR Newswire reached out to us, liked what we were doing, was trying to figure out if we could find a way to work together. They wanted to offer like a local distribution for a couple $100s. And I really pushed back and said, my clients aren't really looking for just local news. They're looking for national news. So they charge $1,700 plus today for a 600-word press release. And, my clients were just paying a few $100s. And so we did come to a deal. At first, it was provisional to see how it worked. And all of our press releases today go out nationally through PR Newswire, and you don't have to pay $1,700. Caveat is you have to be a small business, basically someone that their sales team is not interested in. They are looking for, Fortune 500 clients who are willing to spend $1,700 on a press release, and, also get it translated and sent globally, and that's $15,000. And hey, let's add a
That's
multimedia newsroom for $30,000 a year. So, most of all of my clients fall into, we don't have that kind of budget. We're looking for smaller. And so it's a really good way for them to get access to a wire and save a lot of money. And it sort of turned out to be fortuitous, because I had to stop emailing journalists, because over the years, media databases became commonplace, and people will license a media database from anywhere from $7,000 to $20,000 a year. And in theory, that sounds great. But what happens is a golf club company will, license that. They'll send it to 2,400 golf media contacts. Not much happens. And because they're not telling a story, and they're not giving the journalist a compelling reason to write about them. What's the story behind you? What is it that you're doing that's different than everybody else? They're not speaking in a way that compels the journalist to write about them. So then they get desperate, and they start emailing financial analysts and banking reporters thinking, well, bankers and financial Wall Street people like to play golf. But what they don't realize is, and maybe they do realize and don't care, is that, a financial analyst isn't going to all of a sudden write a review about golf
Definitely.
clubs. And so that's being replicated across every industry. And as a result, most journalists' inboxes are just full of so much spam, especially if they're a national journalist. A lot of the local media, it's tolerable, but for the national media, there's so much off-targeted stuff that their inbox is very difficult, and it's very hard to get them to reach a journalist through that. Even PR firms that pitch through email often have to follow up by phone and sort of guide the journalist how to do a search in their inbox to find the pitch that they sent. And so, for that reason, the wire is even more important. In the United States, we basically have a duopoly of press release newswires. It's PR Newswire and Business Wire. They're both pretty expensive. We partner with PR Newswire. You don't need to be on both because journalists will check both of them.
Uh,
That's pretty much, they'll be losing half the market if they only check one. And there's a lot of little noise and little players out there, but journalists basically go to those two. And so it's a really great way for them to see
yeah.
content that is not full of spam. They're very clean. They go in, they look at the industry feed. They can customize it with a journalist login to exclude maybe keywords that they're not interested in. Like maybe they cover fashion, but they don't cover high fashion. So they may set up, block it if it mentions certain keywords, or, make sure you definitely tag or pin press releases that do mention certain keywords and things like that. So it's become even more important for journalists, to be on these news wires for that reason. And so that's sort of how I ended up in that
That's a
space
long
and what I do.
that's a long work. That's a long work to bring in a great service to people. No, it's a very long work. I know you spoke about fax. A lot of people, for the Gen Z watching this podcast, I know a lot of people still have fax, but a lot of Gen Z don't really know what the fax is. Some do because they see it on the website, they say fax, or probably they need to do some fax. I know there's still, if you go to the library, in the municipal, you can still see one fax machine that you can fax to, but a lot of people really don't know what that you can actually send a press release via fax. Like, wow, this is new. And I think as at 1994 when it got started, I know there was no internet, wasn't really that thing then as much compared to what we have right now. But with just a click of a button, you can send an email. You can always communicate. 1 second, I'm sending you an email with all the information you need to know. So now, if you look at over the years, for you, what has been some of the most significant changes you've seen in the PR landscape? Because things was different. I know you were trying to explain something, but what's the difference between how it was done then concerning press releases? What are the significant changes?
I think that some of the big changes I saw over the last 27 years is less fixation on perfection. It used to be the press releases had to be in perfect AP style before they hit the newswire. Now they just make sure it's basically in the same right format, but they care less about perfection. Used to be someone said if you got a press release through that had one mistake, you could be blackballed by journalists. Journalists don't care about perfection. They just want the story. And so I think that that's one thing I've seen is how that's relaxed. And, that's kind of, I think good. Another thing is, what is media has changed. 27 years ago, there wasn't blogs. And then when blogs came, the media PR Newswire had to be convinced to give bloggers access to the journalist login. All of the press releases are public, but that login is really good because you can look at a particular feed, customize it. It's really valuable to have that login. And they were very apprehensive of it. And I explained to them, hey, there are blogs today that have more traffic than the leading trade journal, their website. And they said, how do you know that? And I introduced them at the time, I think it's called Alexa, and it would rank traffic and things like that because everybody used toolbars and things like that in the day. And so they were really impressed and they started opening it up. And today, if you're an Instagram influencer and you cover fashion, you can get journalist access. So, I follow a guy on TikTok called Snackalator, and he does a weekly roundup of new snacks hitting grocery stores. And he says, I get all of these images and my information from the press releases on the wire. And so, what we consider media today is evolving. There's still newspapers, there's still magazines, there's still trade publications, there's still TV and radio, but now there's also a whole new world of like, individuals and blogs and podcast and social media influencers. And so I find that exciting, and I feel like it's opening up more opportunities for people.
Opening more opportunities for people. So earlier on, you spoke about journalists really don't care about how perfect you write it. They just want a story. So the question now is, what distinguishes a press release that get picked up by journalists from the one that hands in probably in their junk that they don't get to publish?
Right. So the reality is 97% of press releases that go over the wire, and some of them pay that $1,700 plus, 97% of them do not generate earned media. And that's what we call it when a journalist writes about you. And that's the goal of it. When a press release goes out, it gets syndicated, it appears on certain websites, the press release, but is not the article. We're looking for someone to transform that press release into an article. And the fact is, most press releases don't. And what I found is that if you look at the 3% of press releases that do get picked up, there are a lot of themes and a lot of types of releases that you can do yourself and you can replicate. And so for example, I see a lot of people doing personnel change press releases. Hey, we have a new associate of HR, and this is a little bit about her. And then they'll send it over the wire. And I just sit there and go, wow, this is a big waste of money because you just paid to go over a wire for something that's not really newsworthy. Now, if this person is an executive or, a well recognized industry veteran, that's appropriate. But if it's just the average person, I wouldn't spend money to go over a wire, even if it's just, a few $100s through e-releases. You would do just as well if you took that person's headshot and wrote a little bit about them, like a paragraph, where they came from, what they're doing, what their responsibilities are, when they start, maybe a little paragraph about your company, and you just sent that to your local newspaper, your local business magazine or newspaper, if you're lucky enough to have those, and maybe a trade publication or two. A lot of the trade publications, as well as some of the business magazines and newspapers, have a dedicated email address for what they call an on the move section, where they have a little bit about people who are, moving jobs and coming into a new position at places, and they often include the person's picture. I would recommend that before I'd spend money to go out over a wire. The types of releases that are meaningful are those that tell a story. They educate. They distinguish something that is unique. For example, if it's a product launch press release, and that's another popular one that we get. Most of them are, here's a new product, here's a list of features, here's a page to learn more. Not a lot for a journalist to write a story about, but let's say it's a logistics software solution. One thing you can do is take a data point and put in there and say, hey, new transportation companies fell at a rate of 63% in the first 5 years. Publicly available data you can incorporate, but it shows the stakes of the failure rate in your industry. And it puts your software in perspective. Then put a use case study in there. You're crazy if you went to market without people beta testing your product. Take someone who had a favorable experience and share their journey. This company is 3 years old. Each year they've lost money. Last year they lost 7%. This year they were on track to lose 5%. And they used your logistics software solution, and after the end of 120 days, they're projected to show a net profit this year of 3%. And then you can have a quote by them talking about, we thought it would still take a couple more years before we achieved profitability, but we found this software better calculated our cost and allowed us to give better quotes to people that were based in reality. And the numbers speak for themselves, something like that. And all of a sudden, a journalist has a story where they're like, hey, my audience or, transportation companies would be interested in this. It shows what's at stakes. It shows the problem that it solves for people. Writing quotes, people tend to get pushed around in negotiation, but here you know exactly what you have to get in order to be profitable, and therefore you can write more intelligent quotes, and you're not reacting emotionally, you're acting logically to people's negotiations. And so that is powerful. And having a really great quote by someone who makes the difference. And it's still a product launch press release, but now it's one that the journalists are going to want to write about because they know this is going to educate or entertain my audience. And that's their job as journalists, is to filter out what is going to be important enough or interesting enough that it will captivate or educate their audience. And ideally, it does a little bit of
True.
both. And so just make sure you're just solving that. Other types of newsworthy press releases, I mentioned that data works really well, but not the way I used to do it, where it was just here's the data and nothing else. You got to have it in perspective. Owning data is powerful. And one of the
Data
ways in
is
which you
power.
can do that is to do an industry survey. Survey your industry. Take things that people are talking about or trending. Think about if you're going to a trade show, a conference right now, what would be the things you'd want to know from your colleagues? Hey, have you noticed that people are beginning to, ask for smaller quotes, or they're paying more slowly? That could be a trend that, there's, some financial consolidation in your industry and that people are cutting back on spend. And that could be an interesting number and statistic around that. Like, do you plan on spending the same money in marketing, or have you noticed that your customers are spending less, or do you think they're spending the same, or do you think they're spending more? Um, you know, those are all really interesting topics. AI is really hot. If it pertains to your industry, you'd ask some questions around that. Do you have concerns that AI could replace part of your business, or what are your thoughts around that? And so if you build out a survey, I usually use SurveyMonkey. I like 4 questions per page. So usually I tell people you can do, 12 questions over 3 pages, or probably no more than 16 questions over 4 pages, and really brainstorm and ask really intelligent questions that people would probably want to know the answer to right now, and just play with it and be creative and try to vary them. And then you take that link and you go to a smaller independent trade association. They're out there. You don't know them. I didn't know them until I did a search for them in my industry. I just thought there was Public Relations Society of America. That's the big one. Everybody knows that. The big ones aren't going to cooperate with you. There's nothing in it for them. When I did my research, I found out there was 700 other PR trade associations around public relations in the United States alone. And some of them are going to be too small or too niche, like Florida PR firms, or Mid-Atlantic, or Asian American PR firms. But some are going to be like, PR firms of 50 employees or less. Well, that probably speaks for most PR firms. And to be honest, I wouldn't necessarily trust what the big giant ones say, because who's going to speak on their behalf? I'm sure there are people throughout that, the big giant ones, that have varying opinions. And so, go to that trade association and say, hey, would you be willing to share this survey that...
Hey, winners, as we continue our journey together today, I want to share something truly special with you. Over the years, I've had the privilege of coaching countless business owners, entrepreneurs, leaders, guiding them to achieve breakthrough results and unlocking their full potential. So I'm opening up just 4 slots for my monthly business coaching program. That's right, 4 slots. After being fully booked for the past 3 years, if you're ready to elevate your business with personalized guidance, proven strategy, and a supportive community, I'm here to help you navigate challenges, refine your vision, and achieve your goals. So if you're committed to taking your business to the next level, I want to hear from you. Reach out to me directly at jay@winnercirclewithj.com and discuss how we can work together to build the future your business deserves. So don't wait. This is your moment. Join Winner Circle and let's embark on this transformative journey towards success together. And now let's dive back into today's episode.
That I have to your members, ideally email and social media. If I get 100 or more responses, I'll be able to include it. And your organization in a press release I'll be issuing in the coming weeks over PR Newswire. So the small trade associations, because people don't know about them, see this as an opportunity for them to get a little media attention too. And I would say about 2/3 of the time, the first trade association we approach says yes. And that's just the way that I sort of broach it. Sometimes they may want to co-brand the survey, and I don't see a downside to that. And then you get the data, build a page on your website where you put all the data, all the questions, all the responses, make it a resource. But you're going to pick one or at most two questions in there to have the biggest surprise. What's going to be the biggest aha moment? And you're going to make that the focus of the press release. You're going to link to the page with all the questions and answers. So a journalist can go there and write several other different stories, but you're going to pick the two that you feel the industry is going to be responsive to the most. And you're going to put a quote in there of you saying why you felt that the numbers skewed in a particular way. And here you can show some real analysis or some real leadership. Maybe 57% feel that AI is going to be a threat to their business. And maybe you could say, hey, while I don't think that AI is going to destroy our business, I do think that people who don't learn how to use it and incorporate it in their job and in their services are probably going to be at a very severe disadvantage in the coming years. And so that makes you seem like smart, and you're like, you're settling down, don't be an alarmist kind of thing, which is always a good rationale to have. And it really elevates you. And when you send these out, I generally see 6 to 8 articles at a minimum that you get within your industry or people who cover your industry. And so these work really, really well. And the way I approached it, you don't have to have your own community. You can borrow others through these partnerships with trade associations. You generally get links to that resource page if you built it out really well from a lot of key trade publications, which is going to enhance your SEO and make you seem really important. And it positions you as a thought leader in your industry. And all of a sudden, when people are getting quotes or looking at who to consider, they're going to say, this guy's, a thought leader. The other guy's just someone who provides services. It really makes you stand out, and it really gives you a huge, huge advantage.
Huge advantage. Thank you for that information. Standing in authority is very powerful, especially when you're in a competitive industry. So now let's quickly talk about something you mentioned earlier, because I put a note on that. You mentioned the importance of targeting the right journalists. I just want you to just give us a quick note on that. If you can, some strategies businesses can use to identify and reach journalists who cover their niche, which is very important.
Right. So with eReleases, we make it very easy. We have lots of little industry categories that you can pick. And within that, it gets tagged to the appropriate media. So if you tag it as fashion and something else, it goes to those appropriate people. That being said, the Wire does look at those, and they make sure that those are appropriate. We've had people who've like, I want to pick 40 categories. Well, they pay extra for the categories, but what'll happen is the newswire will say, no, we deem that these 3, 4, or 5 are probably appropriate, and everything else is not going to do. You'll get your money back for those additional categories. But the Wire doesn't want it to become the inbox that is spammy and stuff like that. So even if you pick the wrong category, we will often go back to you and say, hey, this is not going to be the appropriate category. You're probably not going to get pickup in that category if the newswire is okay with it. And secondly, we feel the right category for you is this. And it is often appropriate to have multiple categories. If you're, in the high tech world, there's a high tech category, but if you're talking about a book, then also book and the book category would be appropriate. But we do want to make sure that the categories are appropriate, and there is someone overlooking that to ensure that it does maintain, that it makes sense, the categories that you do select.
So much for that clarification. And I also know that a lot of businesses, they get a lot of press distribution compared to other. So because I noticed like some businesses are not even doing so great but they have a lot of press hype on them. When they're talking, probably when there's an interview um, by local media, they go to the business and interview them and they talk about the product and say, oh, okay, they be that kind of authority stand whereby when they're thinking about interviewing restaurant, they just think about them. Even there are some better restaurant, but they're not getting the right press release. So what set them apart from other businesses?
So they've done the work. They've sent press releases or pitches over time, and when a journalist has reached out to them and said, "Hey, I see you pitched me a few times. It's never been a fit, but I'm working on a story now, and I'm looking to put in a local business, and you came to mind. And could I get a quote from you about this subject?" And, if you drop everything, give them a really great quote where you say something very powerful, active verbs, strength. You say something that can't easily be paraphrased. And for some people, when you're put on the spot, you may just be honest and just say, "Hey, I don't want to give you a flimsy quote. Could I spend a few minutes and email you back and give you a call? We could go over it." Take a breather, make sure you put together a very powerful sentence or at most two sentences. And once you do that, they say, "I immediately was able to reach this person. They immediately came through. They gave me a great quote. I'm going to put them on my Rolodex. When I'm in a pinch, I can call on them." And so all it takes is being available, being on their mind by doing the pitches and reaching out to them a little bit over time. And local media is the one where I tell people, do the pitching yourself. Get their email address. You don't have to write a press release. You could write a pitch, just a couple sentences. What is it that you're announcing that's kind of interesting or newsworthy, or there's a newsworthy hook? Could be something you've seen trend in other cities and you feel you would be a good fit in this city. You don't tell them that. Don't say, "I've seen in Chicago someone wrote about a local company there. I feel like you could write about me here with the same thing." No, but you just say, "Hey, I've noticed a trend where they're talking about going green in the dry cleaning industry, and we've invested, $1.8 million over the years, and we do not use any harsh chemicals today. And I'd love to share what we're doing. And also, we're celebrating our 20th anniversary later this year. Uh, and put a quote in there, that really strong sentence with active verbs that's really powerful. And all of a sudden, a journalist, if there's a great quote, can envision an article around it. And if a journalist is ever considering two pictures or stories, and one, they don't have a quote, or they do and it's kind of a weak quote, but the other one's in a powerful quote, one that's just like smacks, is like, that's a great sentence, they'll gravitate towards that every time. And so that's all you have to do. And with local media, we're not talking about a lot of work. There's probably less than 10 people who would cover you in your local news world. Your local newspaper, find out who covers your industry, business magazine or newspaper, if you're looking to have one or both of those. We have both in our area. We also have a Baltimore magazine, which is a consumer magazine, which may be appropriate depending on what services you have. And then, look at TV and radio. Is there sometimes, like a weekend talk show that, spotlights or interviews or profiles of business? Find out who the producer or booker of that segment is by just asking, and get their email address. Same thing with the newspapers, get their email address. If it's not online, you can call and ask. These are not celebrities. They are supposed to be members of the community, and they're supposed to be accessible. And so it's not a weird ask to request their email address. And, if they say, "Hey, I can just patch you through to them," you leave a voicemail, just say, "Hey, I'd love to pitch you sometimes. I work better through email because I clam up over the phone," and they often are very accommodating. That being said, nothing wrong with reaching out to them sometimes after you
Child.
pitch them, especially if you feel you have a very strong pitch, and say, "Hey, I just wanted to touch base. I did email you. I know email things can get lost. So if you have any questions," and maybe give them a clue to your domain name or your email address or some way to easily find you if they want to do an email search, like maybe the name of your company. And again, if your quote is phenomenal, you might just say, "Oh, I included what I thought was a pretty good quote." You could even just wrap up by just, giving it to them over the phone and getting them more curious. Yeah, I mean, that's a great way to start. And what you find
That's
is,
powerful.
just like you said, if you do this work, they will call on you again and again. And it's why you see the same companies get mentioned in markets. Like the Baltimore Sun loves these two or three companies that I see all the time. And that's how, I've talked to them and they say they've never spent a dollar advertising in the Baltimore Sun, but they know, that when the person has a story, they will drop everything. And if it's HR related, they'll bring in their HR director and they'll get them on the phone, and they're just very responsive, and they've been trained to say, hey, we'll get back to you within the next 30 minutes with an amazing quote or two for you to consider. And they're just reliable. And if they want images or photos, they're very accommodating about getting that. And again, we live in a day and age where they don't expect professional photographs. The ones that look like they were done by professionals, with the exception of headshots for new employees, a lot of the ones that are product or service based or office related, like HR, work culture, they prefer more candid shots. And the ones you take on your phone, they work the best. And they know that because they put these images on websites, and they see that the ones that people gravitate to are not the polished product on blue velvet, well lit. It is the product in a messy office with coffee cups and soda bottles and everything else all around.
Make it
And so,
feels real. Yeah.
and that's another change that's happened with PR that I think is great. Used to be, it's like, gosh, now I have to spend hundreds of dollars, if not thousands, on a professional photo shoot, and you don't anymore.
All right. You don't anymore. Things have changed, especially the day and age we are right now. So now let's talk a little bit about e-releases, your organization, Um, now I just want to ask a direct question. Yeah, and the question is, how does your organization ensure that press releases is distributed and not just only being distributed only, are seen by the right people? How do you do that? And also, what also sets you apart from other PR services? Because there's a lot of PR services right now. So what sets you apart from them?
So we're the only one that offers a national distribution over PR Newswire for anything close to what we charge. We are probably a savings to most people of 75%, maybe 2/3, especially if you use our new customer special coming in. And so we're a lot cheaper to get that access to national distribution over PR Newswire. There is no cheap way to go through Business Wire nationally. And we're the only one that offers this through PR Newswire. They've partnered with others in the past like us, but what they found is those people would then go to large companies and say you can save money, by not going through PR Newswire. And they would make PR Newswire angry because they weren't a good partner. They were trying to take money away from their sales team. So we're very good about vetting people that come through. If you're a very large company or publicly traded, we will introduce you to a contact at PR Newswire. So we just are great partners of PR Newswire, and for that reason, they allow us to have this really great deal with them, where people, especially entrepreneurs, startups, small businesses, save so much money and get that access to the Newswire.
Vanity PR, and why it is very essential for businesses to focus on real media coverage. I just want the listeners to be able to enjoy your knowledge on that particular word, Vanity PR.
So, when it comes to getting real media coverage, when you get picked up like in the New York Times, you feel it. Your traffic goes up. The number of leads coming in increases. The number of customers comes in increases. That's real media coverage. When you get picked up in Forbes magazine, the actual print magazine, same thing. Tens of thousands of people read that magazine. Now, Forbes also has online website, and they also have what used to be blogs, but now they've rebranded it something else. But those places don't appear in the magazine, and they're more limited. They're not on the primary website. You can pay money, and either with Forbes's knowledge or without, I've seen cases where Forbes promotes a channel opportunity where you can consistently do a monthly column and you pay a certain thing like $15,000, $20,000 a year. Again, you're not going to be in the magazine. You're not going to be on a prominent place on their website, but it's a way for them to monetize, the value of the Forbes name. And some people will share that spotlight and let people guest post, and they charge them, not through Forbes. And so you can pay a couple $1,000s and get that. And some people like it. They get to mention this logo at Forbes. But if you're a marketer, your eyes roll when you see that because you know they just paid money. And I know that you're not going to get any customers from that. You're not going to get any leads from that. And you're certainly not going to get much benefit from it. It's not what happens when you get in a Forbes article and it gets in the magazine. And so that's the distinction. Now, if you feel it will help with your conversions, maybe you could make an argument that that's $2,000 well spent. But if your users are very sophisticated, they will recognize that this is just basically paid placement. In addition, there's a whole cottage industry of people that charge anywhere from $50 to a few $100s to syndicate your press release. I'd mentioned when the press release goes out over PR Newswire, it does appear on Yahoo Finance and several, they tend to be business finance websites, and your press release is there and they send you a report with the links of that. But that's not the goal. The goal is to get the articles. When you use these other services, they never reach any media. The media is not part of their equation. Their equation is to get those links with your press release on these websites. They don't give you SEO benefit. I've heard anecdotally you get sometimes a little bump, but you're not supposed to because they're all no follow tags. And they're all duplicate content. And they don't penalize you because Google recognizes that if they did, every publicly traded company would be penalized because they're all issuing releases that do get syndicated. But some of these people will, show your website on 700 locations, and they may be a subdomain of a website. They don't go to places where real people are looking. They don't go to places where real people are searching. And again, I don't even think they look good from a credibility indicator if you were to use some of their logos, because some of these places are laughable. But, some people don't, I've heard people say, why would I spend money with you when I could spend $99 with this company? And they have Wire in their name. And I'm just like, well, they don't reach the media. And they're like, what do you mean? I said, you won't reach any journalists there. They don't even promise or mention journalists on their website. It's all about syndication. And so there's a big education there. The goal should be with PR to get earned media. And the only way you can get earned media is to get in front of journalists. And unfortunately, in the US, you have to be on Business Wire or PR Newswire. And if you're a small business, it's going to cost you about $2,000 to go with either of those unless you use eReleases. And so that's the big difference with us and the value that we provide. But that being said, I want to make sure that the press releases you issue through us are newsworthy and that they are strategic types of press releases, like the survey, like the story-based product launch, and not the personnel change. And I tell people, I have a free masterclass where you can learn exactly what strategic press releases are. And I go through the survey one and I go through some of the others, and it's completely free. And it's at eReleases.com/plan, PLAN. And it's less than an hour long video and some accompanying material. And if you go through that, you will probably be able to brainstorm 6 to 10 ideas that are newsworthy. And if you build a PR campaign around those newsworthy releases and you do a series of 6 to 8 releases, and that's a PR campaign, 6 to 8 releases, whether it takes you a year or a year and a half to do all 6 to 8 releases, at the end of it, 2 or 3 of them should result in meaningful media pickup with actual articles, which should result in new customers, new leads, and it should improve your conversion rate with your existing leads, as well as improve your churn rate where people are less likely to leave you. Now, that being said, when you do get these media pickups, you want to share your successes, share it with social media, share it with your leads, share it with your customers. When a customer reads about you in a trade magazine or media pickup, they feel good about you and feel safer that they're with the right customer. So they're less likely to price shop or reconsider you. There's a point where after a year or two, some people just say, we should shop around and make sure we're using the right company. If you're giving them this content and showing that you're in trade publications, you're getting media coverage, people are excited to talk about you, and you're issuing newsworthy content to the media, they are going to feel comfortable that they are with the right company. Why would you leave somebody who seems like they're hot and they're being recognized nationally? They just don't normally do that, not even over a price point. And also the customers that people generally get from earned media, they want to work with you. The journalist chose to write about you, so you've gotten great credibility by being chosen to be written about, and they are less likely to shop around. They're likely to just want to do business with you. I feel you're the right company. They don't even open a new browser and go out and see what they could get elsewhere for cheaper.
Strategies. So can you tell us what readers can expect and how they will benefit from subscribing to that particular newsletter?
Yeah, so I just cover PR trends, cover things that are working. I share tips and tools, like how to use AI, properly. So many people go to AI and say, write a press release. Here's my company. And it will write a press release that's been, they've been trained on the 97% of press releases that don't work. So it will write a press release that looks good. And it looks like the types of press releases you see your competitors do. But the truth is your competitors aren't getting media pickup, and neither with you. So, my approach is go to AI knowing exactly what you want it to write about, because you have done the research, you've looked at the press release strategies that are working, and you're going to it, and then you ask it to, how would you structure this press release on this topic? And then it'll give you a structure, and then I tell it to attack it piece by piece. You'll get better results. Like, okay, give me 10 headlines for this press release that you just gave me the structure. Okay, I'm going to pick this headline. Or if you feel like, but could you also add this element to the headline and give me 5 versions of that? Then, okay, now give me 3 versions of an opening paragraph, and pay attention to, does it answer the who, what, when, where, how, and why of journalism? And then it gives it to you. And then you're just like, okay, I'm going to pick this paragraph. Then, could you now write the next paragraph, and give me 3 options for the next paragraph? And so you're picking and choosing the best, and you're retraining it as you find, you're like, I like this second paragraph, but you didn't mention this, and I really want to get that element, early in the press release. And then it'll, rewrite that. Or you could say rewrite 3 versions with that element added. And so now I want this paragraph to have a quote by me, and I want the quote to be very strong, active verbs, and I want that sentence to stand out. And I want to say it with conviction, and and boom, see if it comes up with something. That's the one area where sometimes I go in and rewrite, because I really want that one sentence to sing. I want the journalist to envision a great article where that quote stands out and is the spotlight and centerpiece. And so that's a really important part. And when I approach it like that, yeah, it takes a little bit longer, but as opposed to writing a press release, I should spend over an hour using AI and walking it piece by piece through it. I don't spend more than usually 10 minutes on it, but at the end of it, you have such a better release than if you just say, here's my subject area that I want you to write about. Now write a 600-word press release. It's just going to throw out something. And I find that the more you slow AI down, you get pieces that are stronger than if you had it produce it all at once.
It's powerful. That's really powerful. So for our listeners who may be feeling overwhelmed by the idea of getting started with PR for their business, so what's one actionable step they can take today?
Right. So I think the easiest thing is to sign up for that masterclass. It's a very small, easy to digest approach. And then when you're ready to get started, feel free to reach out with our staff. That masterclass again is at eReleases.com/plan, PLAN, and completely free. And like I said, less than an hour long video, and there's free cheat sheets and other stuff that accompany it. And start there. And when you're ready, you can approach the staff. We only have editors, no salespeople, and it's easy to get started for as little as like $349 to distribute a release. You can approach us through phone, email, or chat between the hours of 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. And we're there to help people. We hold your hand through the process, and we recognize there's a lot of people that come to PR new for the first time, and we're really good and very giving with our time and information and walking people through that process.
All right. For somebody listening to this show who feels like, you know what, I need to start working with eReleases right now. So what's the best way for them to get started?
So again, I think just hit eReleases.com. All of our social media is in the lower right. And I tell people, you can get an education that will beat what most PR firms have by just going to eReleases.com/plan and, sign up for that free masterclass. And, when you have an hour of time, just watch it. And I think it will blow your mind in such a common sense way that you'll walk away saying, it made sense, but, take notes, brainstorm, and you will realize that you have compelling press releases you can write about your business,
Mhm.
regardless of your industry, regardless of how unimportant you feel that you are. And I always tell people, they go, I feel like I'm too small for PR right now. And recognize that journalists get the most shares and most engagement when they spotlight a new company that no one knows about or a new service no one knows about. And often these are small businesses. And so you're missing an opportunity that's there, and it is for small businesses. The bigger you get and the more people know about you, the less likely a journalist is going to feel this is important enough to share with their audience.
What's one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember regarding their approach to media coverage and public relations? So then we can hand it from there.
Right. So with PR and branding, PR is about, engaging with the media, engaging with the public as well. And branding is about how you position yourself in public. And so branding is more, it's multifaceted, but it's about how you project yourself, your logo, the word choice you use, your blog posts. Are they just resourceful, very professional, or are they very, personable? And things like that. Those are branding choices. And so there is overlap between the two, but they certainly are quite a bit different because PR has a little bit more of a focus on trying to get that earned media and try to get the media to cover you. And as far as the second thing, the big takeaway I would tell people is the best time to start PR is now, and it doesn't have to be something you dedicate even more than a couple hours to. It's not going to be all consuming. It literally is something that you can start incorporating and just put on your calendar, to try to do it maybe every other month or maybe at least once a quarter. And that you come up with a strategic press release, you approach it to get written the way I sort of outlined, and then send it out. And again, not every press release is going to be a hit, but if you do the releases that I outlined in that masterclass, you do 6 to 8 of them, 2 or 3 of them are going to result in meaningful media. And that can be huge for a company. I've seen some companies where one article mentioned in a trade publication resulted in over $40 million in sales. There's lots of magical, wonderful things that can happen with PR. They're not always guaranteed. They're not always going to be the same results, but as long as you stay on top of it, you continue to do meaningful strategic releases, you will see ones that do move the needle. And you will also see that this is something that you can do with minimal effort. You just have to stay on top of it and do it regularly. And again, it can be as little as once a quarter. And once a quarter, you spend 2 or 3 hours on this, and it can literally result in those 2 or 3 hours being worth $10,000 an hour. And that's the real high value part of hours that you should be doing in your business.
Thank you so much for giving us this information you gave us today. I'm sure a lot of listeners on this show really got a lot of information, and definitely they will reach out to be able to, push their business and getting the right PR for their business instead of just doing vanity PR, the word vanity. You need to take note of that. So if you found today's episode valuable, please subscribe to the Winner Circle podcast and also share with others who could benefit from Mickey's insight. So, and also remember, as you implement these strategies, remember that true coverage can make a significant impact on your brand and businesses. So I want to say thank you again to Mickey for your insight today and sharing your expertise with us today. For a lot of Winner Circle members and listeners who are mostly business owners, leaders, and entrepreneurs, it's clear and it's very clear that effective PR is not just about any coverage. It's about getting the right coverage that can genuinely elevate a business. And that's how we're going to put it to hand today. And I want you to join us next time as we continue to explore success stories and strategies from leaders across various industries. Until then, keep striving for excellence in your pursuit for greatness, and thank you for being part of the Winner Circle. Remember, stay in the Winner Circle. And until next time, sign out.